Please welcome Mr. Haydock to the stage.
Thanks. Am I on? Can you hear me? Checking that. How many of you, and I know a significant number of hands are going to go up, have ever had the opportunity to be at Heartland Christian Camp? Yeah, that's what I like to see. For those of you that don't know, Heartland's a Christian camp up nearby. I had the opportunity to go there as a camper, both as a junior high and high school student, and later on serve in a variety of roles working there. I worked on the rec staff for a while. I worked doing video stuff for a while. Later on, I was lead dean, which meant I got to do all the punishment. Theron Morgan reminds me of that time because he tells me that I was a terrible, mean person during that time. So, Theron, one day you'll forgive me for making you chop wood or whatever I had you do. Anyways, one of my first years at Heartland, I was on the rec staff. And Heartland is on a property in the mountains that is free range for cattle, which means that people who have cows don't have to have them fenced in. They're allowed to just run. They have the free run of the place. So one summer, we had the privilege of, as a rec staff, trying to deal with the fact that ginormous bulls are coming through camp all the time, which is kind of entertaining. It's kind of fun, especially when you're out at the paintball field and bulls show up and all of a sudden you get to light up a brown bull and make it all of a sudden bright green, right? So it's kind of fun. We had fun with it. That was our responsibility. However, when you start to think about it from an administrative standpoint, a liability standpoint, let's think about maybe a junior camp situation where you have 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, right? If you have 300 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders and a bull comes walking through camp, half of them are going to run one direction screaming away from the bull. The other half are going to run screaming right at the bull, which is not really the safest of situations, right? So we were dealing with this bull situation all the time, and it was one of our favorite things as a rec staff. We'd get the call on our radios, we'd jump in our truck and we'd go flying away and chase this bull out of camp. Since then, they've put in some cattle gates and some things so they don't have that issue anymore, right? Well, those of you that have been to Heartland, you know that on the last nights of camp, Thursday nights, there's this tradition where, I wouldn't say it's a tradition, but every year it happens, where, especially at the high school camps, somebody is going to sneak out and ring the bell. Right? Somebody's going to do it, right? There's this 50-year-old bell. They use it to signify when there's a schedule change or when you're going from point A to point B. That's what they do. I will confess to you secretly, I rang the bell when I was a senior in high school. Shh. Right? So it's this big challenge. It's kind of fun. So the staff all knows it's coming because every year some group, usually guys, wants to sneak out of their cabin in the middle of the night and go ring this bell. And so we kind of started to take, as the summer went on, my summer there as a rec staff, we kind of took that as a challenge, like, oh, we're not letting any kids ring that bell. It's not happening. We're going to stop them, right? Not because there's any necessarily ill intent there, but because it was fun for us. It was a fun little competition, right? So our last night there, I think it was one of the high school camps. I don't remember if it was the first or second one. We're sitting up in what they call the upper room, which kind of overlooks the bell, right? And we're just kind of staying awake. We're hanging out, goofing around, doing what, I was 19 at the time, doing what 19-year-olds do, and waiting for, inevitably, we know a group is going to come and ring that bell. So we're sitting up there and hanging out, and all of a sudden we notice that there is a patch of grass right by the bell, right? And the reason the bulls are coming into camp is because we have nice grass. It's well taken care of. There's a sprinkler system. They like eating it. And we notice that on that patch of grass is a bull we have nicknamed Torrance. Torrance is an entirely black bull. He's dark as can be, and he's the most massive creature I've ever seen. I don't get scared of animals very easily, but the couple times we've had to chase Torrance out of camp, my knees shake a little bit. It was a little bit scary. He's a huge bull. Those of you that have been around a bull and been right next to him, you know how big and strong and massive those creatures are. So we kind of start thinking to ourselves, oh my gosh, a group of kids are about to come out and try to ring this bell, I bet, and they're going to run face to face with Torrance. So we just decide, and I'm sure my bosses at Heartland weren't thrilled with this decision, well, instead of us chasing the kids off, we'll let Torrance do our job. We'll let Torrance scare them away. So sure enough, we wait and we wait and we wait, and it gets to be 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, we're sitting up there, and as high school boys are prone to do, they're never as sneaky as they think they are. a group comes sneaking down, giggling and laughing, and every time someone laughs loud, someone goes, shh, which is, of course, louder than the actual kid laughing and gives it away. And we're just waiting for it. And sure enough, this group of kids come walking up to the bell, and they can't see Torrance because it's dark as night. He's a black bull, and they get about 10 feet away from me to that mic right there from Torrance. And Torrance is an angry bull. He's testy. We've been working with him all summer. And Torrance just kind of looks up, and they see his eyes reflecting right back at him. And they take off running the other direction. It was awesome. I tell you that story because it's kind of a weird dynamic we get at Heartland. Like, what's so cool about sneaking out of your cabin in the middle of the night and going to ring a 50-year-old bell? What's so cool about that? When you think about just the act itself, it's not that great, right? In fact, you risk having to do some extra, I know because I used to make Theron do some chopping wood the next morning as a result before you leave, right? So what's so great, what's so compelling about that experience that every year we get a group of high school boys, and sometimes in the junior high camps, a junior high group of kids that want to do that? What's so compelling is that you share that experience, right? And I know that having done it as a camper. And now I reflect on that and I go, why was that so cool? What was so awesome about that? Why do I giggle when I think about it now? Why is that cool? It's because it's something I shared with my friends. It's something we did together. We accomplished something in a sense, right? We set out to do something as stupid and as silly as ringing a 50-year-old bell is, and we did it. So today I want to talk about the power of community, what that means to share life and how God calls us to live life together, and what that means for the vibrancy of your life when things are good and how much more fulfilled it is to share an experience with someone. And then on the other end, when things aren't so good, how powerful and dynamic that experience can be to share life with somebody. My first verse for you today is from Proverbs 27:17. It's the classic when you talk about friendship, right? It's the classic when you talk about people challenging each other. As iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another, right? It's the idea that when you share life, things are more valuable, okay? John 10:10 as well. I have come that you may have life and you may have it to the full. Right? If you want to have life to the full, you're going to share life with people, right? I go to the Well Church in Fresno, and they have this saying that they say it so much it starts to irk me a little bit, but they talk about always doing life together. Excuse me. This idea that when you share life with someone, life is abundant, it's full. You are fulfilling what God called you to do. To me, there's three things. I always have three things. Those of you who were at the FCA breakfast last week know that. I always have three things, right? Three things. To me, if you want to live in community, if you want to have that experience as a young person and later as an adult, to me there's three components to that. Authenticity, humility, and selflessness. To me, if you want to live what God has called you to do, to have these relationships that define you and make life that much more passionate and engaged, those are the three things to me. Okay? St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. This idea that when we act, when we engage in relationships, when we live with one another, when we're willing to sacrifice and show up and work alongside each other, life becomes much more meaningful. You become fulfilled. You become self-actualized, to use a psychological term, right? So let's talk about authenticity. Let's start there. There's an old movie that I don't want to condone or promote in any way, but it's an old movie, and it came out maybe 10 years ago, and it chronicles the journey of a rapper, and he's trying to make it big in the rap culture, this culture that promotes bravado, that promotes how tough you can be, right? This culture that talks about all these materialistic things that in reality have no value, how big your rims are and how nice your whip is and blah, 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 all those other things, right? So it chronicles the rise of this rapper, and he's trying to win these freestyle battles or whatever it is. And in this most secular of movies, it's a terrible movie. In the most secular of movies, you see this interesting dynamic of authenticity arise. Because what happens is in kind of the crux of the movie, the climax, the ultimate moment, right? What happens is he gets to this final rap battle, and there's record producers there, and there's labels and whatever, and he's got to win this rap battle to win $10,000 and live the dream of making it rain or whatever. I don't know. So he's got to win this rap battle. And so the whole story has been this opportunity for two guys to stand up on stage and basically tear down the other person as much as possible, say the most awful, denigrating, profane things about the other person, right? And in that moment, there's this huge paradigm shift, because what happens is, instead of engaging in that, he chooses instead to beat his opponent to the punch. Instead of engaging in this, you're the worst, this is why I'm so cool and you're so stupid, blah, 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 whatever, right? Instead of doing that, he chooses instead to say, this is who I am and these are all my flaws. These are all the things I've been through. And in that moment, in a culture, like I said, that is obsessed with how tough you are and how you present this certain image, that authenticity wins him this competition. And the crowd goes crazy. Because regardless of your faith or your background, there's something being refreshing around being people who are honest with themselves, who aren't afraid to be humble and say, this is who I am, these are my strengths, these are the things I've done, and I'm okay living in Christ's acceptance and forgiveness of that, and that's all right. And even people who maybe don't follow Christ's word or don't align themselves with the values of our faith, recognize the value in that authenticity. When you were willing to embrace authenticity, you can live in relationships that are so much more vibrant, so much more meaningful. Now, that sounds all good and bright and easy, right? But here's the downside to authenticity. It's hard. It's vulnerable, right? The people that you have the closest relationships with, that you're the most honest with, are the people who have the most power to hurt you, right? My relationship with my wife is the most intimate relationship I know. It's the most vulnerable relationship I have. And that can be a challenge for me sometimes. But the more vulnerable I am willing to be, the more blessed our marriage is. And you will find that as you move forward. When you are willing to be authentic, when you are willing to say, I have these flaws and I'm okay with that, I am working to be the man or woman God has called me to be, that authenticity is refreshing, as opposed to posturing and caring so much about what other people care about us. I would actually go as far to say that when I observe the people who are beloved most on this campus and in the other high school campuses I've worked at, usually those people are the most authentic. Because regardless of your faith or values, this idea of authenticity is refreshing, especially because it's so rare at times. Okay? We get a model of authenticity in the Bible. David in the Psalms is so authentic. He's so emotional. We've been talking about that in my 7th grade class. We go through a psalm every day in our devotions, right? David is just all over the place. In one psalm, it's, God, you're so great. I can't believe all you've done for me. I have this grace and this mercy and this other thing. And then in the next psalm, he's, God, why me? I can't believe you treat me this way. I'm a terrible person, right? And it's refreshing because it's authentic. It's why I'm drawn to the Psalms more than almost any other book in the Bible, because David has this honest dialogue even with God, and it almost borders sometimes on the heretical, right? And it's this authentic model of this is how we're called to live. This is who we're supposed to be, embracing who we truly are. There's a story from a philosopher I came across, an author named Peter Rollins, who tells this story about authenticity. I'm going to read it for you. It's a story about a pastor. Every Sunday, the pastor would stand at the front of his church with a booming voice and finish his sermon with a rousing plea. Each week, I go to a nearby town and I serve the poor, the oppressed, and the downtrodden. What do? How do you show your compassion to those in need? People would applaud the minister's closing remarks, and everyone would wave him off at the end of the service as he hurried away in his car. The truth, however, was that each week, the pastor would go to a golf course and play a leisurely 18 holes away from his congregation, family, and friends. This deception had been going on for years, and eventually it comes to the attention of some angels. They were furious at his lies and reported the situation directly to God. After a little consideration, God said to the angels, I'll visit this minister on Sunday, and I will teach him a lesson he'll never forget. Sure enough, next Sunday, God showed up at the church. Yet again, the minister informed his congregation that he was going to go serve the poor, when in reality he leaves and goes to the golf course. This time, however, God intervened. When the minister took his first shot, the ball took off, flew through the air, bounced onto the green, and dropped into the hole. The minister was amazed. At the second hole, the same thing happened. At the third, the same thing happened again. And the fourth, right through to the last hole. With his last stroke, the minister sliced the ball badly. The Haydock School of Golfing hit it straight to the right. But it still curved around, and like all the other ones, found the hole in one. All the while, the angels in heaven watched what took place in utter disbelief. By the time God returned, they shouted, I thought you were going to punish the minister for all his lies. But instead, you give him a perfect round of golf. That may be true, God replied with a smile. But ask yourself this, who is he going to tell? Right? So this idea that his greatest accomplishment, the minister goes out and has the greatest thing, and has this accomplishment he's worked for, and it's not worth anything because there's no one to share it with. It reminds me of another story, there's a book by the name of Into the Wild, later got made into a movie, about a young man who graduates college. His name's Chris McCandless. And he sets out on this grand adventure. He pictures himself as this outdoorsman. Sets out on this grand adventure. He spends time in Arizona, living in the desert in the middle of nowhere on his own, with the ultimate goal of he's going to get to Alaska and he's going to find a way to sustain and live on his own in Alaska in the middle of the wilderness. This idea to reject all the trappings and materialism of modern culture. He's going to do that. That's his big adventure before he settles into the real world. So he ends up in Alaska after a ton of journeys, working all these physical jobs, spending all this time on his own. And he's trying to make the point to his parents and to some other people that he's self-sufficient, that all we need in life is us and the wilderness and God's creation. He sets out on this journey, and it takes a tragic turn. He ends up in Alaska, and he crosses a river. Unbeknownst to him, then the snow melt runs off, and the river rises too high for him to get back across, so he's stuck, he's isolated. And tragically, he ends up perishing in this bus where he founds in the middle of the wilderness all on his own. And the last thing he ever writes is a really compelling statement to me. And it's not even grammatically correct. He scribbles it as he's on his deathbed. He's dying in this bus. And he says, love not real unless shared. And that's the last thing he ever wrote. This idea that he set out to prove that all we need is ourselves. All we need is the bare minimum. This minimalistic approach. And ends up with this revelation that love's not real unless it's shared. This idea that God created us to live and engage in community. Second thing, humility. Okay, we talked about authenticity, living authentically. Humility. This idea that you need to live in humility. For me, one of the biggest challenges for me, and I see it all around us all the time, and we try to challenge each other to do better with it, is sensitivity when we screw up. When people call us and try to hold us accountable. I have a group of friends that are as close to me as anybody in the world. 2 college basketball coaches named Aaron and Tim, and then one of my best friends named Nate. And every phone call, when the phone rings, and I talk to all those guys at least once a week, the first thing whoever answers the phone says is, whatever you're doing right now, do it better, right? And I'll get random text messages that say, do better. This idea that because we live in community, because we share these relationships, because we share the same values, because we share in some ways, some of the same objectives and goals, we want to push each other to do better. To me, when somebody encourages me to do better and holds me accountable, what's my first reaction sometimes? Get defensive, get emotional about it. Right? That's my first reaction. Well, right? And that's the reality, that's human nature. But I would encourage you to flip that paradigm on its head. We try to do that in our basketball program. We try to ask when I get in a kid's face and chew on him, and I will raise my voice at him, we ask him to do what, Jake Wolf? What do we ask you to do? Yeah. We ask you to say something at the end. What do we ask you to say? We ask you to say thank you. We ask you to say thank you. Why? Because I'm trying to make you better. And that's not just true athletically, that's true across the board. When you have deep, meaningful, dynamic relationships, you should be able to grab a hold of each other by the collar and say, hey, do this better. You're not living up to the person God called you to be. You should be able to do that. And I would actually contend the number one way, if you want to be a good athlete, for those of you that are athletes in here, in whatever sport, volleyball, football, baseball, track, whatever, the number one way you can get better is you can embrace that mentality. When someone gives you correction, instead of getting defensive, instead of making an excuse, you can choose to live in humility and say, absolutely, you're right, I'm going to do that better. I embrace that, and in fact, I appreciate you for that. That's hard, and I'm not trying to say that's easy. I get defensive too, it's my first instinct. But if you choose to live in humility, you're going to see relationships and accountability that will push you to a vibrancy like you wouldn't believe. The last step, to me, so you live authentically, you live in humility, is to live selflessly, right? John 15:13 says, there's no greater love than this, that you would lay down your life for a friend. I don't know about you, I don't get the opportunity very often to lay down a life for one of my friends, right? I don't get the opportunity to sacrifice my life on a daily basis. I don't get an opportunity to jump in front of a moving truck and push them out of the way and sacrifice my life. It doesn't happen. But the theme and the context there still reigns true. Do I get the opportunity to take an extra hour out of my day to help somebody else? Absolutely. Do I do that every day? Absolutely not. Should I? Right? This idea that we live selflessly. I'm a quote fiend. I love quotes. As you can tell by the fact I've used 6 of them already, right? In my office, you'll only see one quote on my wall. It's this quote, and I stumbled across it when I was doing my leadership degree at Fresno Pacific University, and I've kind of embraced it as, I hope it's who I am. I hope it's who I'm remembered. It's from George Bernard Shaw. It says, I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a splendid torch which I have a hold of for a second, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before I hand it on to future generations. If one thing can be said about me when I die, hopefully a long time from now, I hope it embodies the values stated in that quote. Right? And here's the great thing about living selflessly. The great dirty secret about being selfless is that being selfless is actually selfish. Being selfless is actually being selfish. If you want to be the most fulfilled, if you want to have the most friends, if you want to fulfill God's calling for your life, you'll live selflessly. Because the little secret about that is when you give of yourself, there's no greater reward than having known that you've given everything you have to somebody else. When you live selflessly, you become a person of respect. You want to be a leader? Live selflessly. My undergraduate degree, my bachelor's degree is in organizational leadership from Fresno Pacific University. And in that, we take, 7 or 8 classes to fulfill your major. And every class, all we talked about was this idea, and we're talking to forefront leaders of leadership in the world, this idea of service, that if you want to lead, you'll serve. You'll put other needs in front of yourself. So you want to have these relationships that are vibrant, that are meaningful, that are fulfilled, serve somebody. Put somebody else's needs in front of your own. Live selflessly. Okay? An example of little acts of selflessness that add up to that fulfillment is tonight when our football team is on that field, having gone through a rough season, having been beaten down, having lost guys to injuries, having faced all kinds of adversity, and it's cold and it's a Thursday night and there might be other stuff going on. Selflessness is showing up and standing and rooting them on the entire game. That's selflessness to me. That's putting the community, our school, in front of yourself. To me, that's it. Now, that's just one example. There's plenty of them that we could use. Another example, and I don't see this much with the high school, but for the junior high, when you get dismissed every day, instead of sprinting to the front of the lunch line, why not letting someone else go in front of you? Some of us high schoolers, especially these freshmen over here, they do that. Why not let someone else go in front of you? That's selflessness. And what you'll see is selflessness, the great irony of selflessness, is that selflessness is actually selfish, is that it actually is more rewarding for you in the process. Okay? For me, I got challenged on that this summer a little bit. There's a guy named Alan Stein who's a big-time basketball coach, and I came across one of his writings this summer, and it said, "Making your bed is a sign of discipline and selflessness. What's your bed say about you?" Seems silly, right? But then I pictured my bed at home, which my wife, who's great, who does not in any way embody some of the stereotypes we have about husband and wife dynamics and nagging or anything like that. I remember my wife over the course of 4 years, maybe once or twice mentioning, "Hey, maybe we can make the bed every once in a while," right? And I thought, this is silly, but this is an act of selflessness. And I'm running strong. I've made the bed every day I've gotten out of it since that day, right? And that's stupid. That's a tiny, minute example, but guess what? I'm really proud of that. And it's silly, but for 26 years of my life, I didn't make the bed ever, right? Because I desire to see my life lived in a selfless way. And that's an easy change. So I would challenge you, what's a simple, easy change for you to live selflessly? What's easy in that regards? What's something small you can do to serve your parents or your friend or a fellow student? What's something you can do to be selfless? I chose to talk about community in my life because I've got extreme examples this year of the both highs and lows of community. In March of this year, I had the opportunity to win a Valley Championship as a member of a coaching staff, and the 5 of us celebrating there at Selland Arena was one of the coolest things I've ever experienced. As an assistant coach, and to celebrate with 5 guys that we just grinded out a whole year of just working our tails off, and then to share that together was incredible. This extreme example for me, accomplishing a goal I've been after since I started coaching 8 years ago. So there's an extreme example of the joy that happens and the fact that I shared that with these group of guys that I had been in the trenches with every day, trying to impact kids' lives positively, but also trying to do things the right way and compete at the highest level. To see that come to fruition was incredible. Then on the other end this summer, I had the opportunity to work NBC basketball camps, which are these phenomenal basketball camps. They're insane. So basically every day we're up at 6 and in the gym by 6:30. We get a workout in before breakfast, and then we're doing basketball stuff until 11 o'clock at night. Go to bed, do it all over again the next day. And those 3 guys I mentioned earlier that call or text and we start every conversation with, "Whatever you're doing right now, do it better." Those 3 guys, I got to share that experience with them, 3 of my closest friends in the world. And so we were at this NBC camp, and on Tuesday, it's a week-long camp. On Tuesday, Monday night, I got the opportunity to get up and share and really enjoyed that. And then on Tuesday, we did this drill called the 4 quarters drill. And it's an NBC camp staple. And it's this really physically demanding drill. It's brutal. And it requires, in order to accomplish your goal of the drill, it requires some communication. It requires encouragement. It requires people to work together. So what happens is it's just this brutal physical drill. And every NBC camp I've ever been to, it's funny that it's called the 4-quarter drill, because as soon as kids get done, as soon as the campers get done and they think they're finished and they've accomplished their goal, we throw it into overtime. And so now they've got to push themselves to this other level. And so literally it is the most grueling physical drill I've ever seen in any basketball practice I've ever been to. It's incredibly demanding, and it requires you to set aside care for yourself and care for somebody else. Well, at that end of the drill, my buddy Tim, who's the camp director, says, "Hey, So this is what I do in post-game speeches. Bring you all together, and then I throw it to Coach Haydock, and I let him do the post-game speech. So he kind of put me on the spot, and I hadn't prepared, and if you know anything about me, I hate not being prepared. Makes me want to throw up and wet my pants. It just drives me nuts. So he threw it to me, and so in that moment, I kind of scrambled, and I threw together a couple words about the power of community, some of the things I'm expressing now, the value of accomplishing things together, and the narrative and the parallel that gets to real life. This idea that you need people to sustain you when you're hurting. And so I kind of bumbled and muttered and stumbled and stuttered and got through that in about 2 minutes. And bell rang. And little did I know that in a couple hours later, I'd see that narrative play out in my own life. Earlier this summer, let me back up. Later that day, I got a phone call from my wife, and I had been dreading this phone call. So we had had the We had discovered that after several years of trying, we had finally been pregnant with our first child. And I got a phone call that day, with my wife in absolute tears, sobbing uncontrollably, saying we'd lost our first kid before he or she ever had the chance to breathe their first breath. And so, here I was, having just shared about community and the need for people to come alongside you and hold you and cry with you. And here come my 3 tough athlete friends, Aaron, Nate, and Tim, who are tough guys. They're not emotional like me. They wouldn't cry on stage in front of a group of people. And they came, and they wept, and they cried with me, and they held me, and they made me be the husband I needed to be. They gave me the strength I needed to have to get onto the phone and speak words of wisdom and pray with my wife and engage the situation for what it was. And so it was just this poignant moment of thank God for those men. And I'm not healed by any definition of the word from that experience. But I can tell you that I thank God every single day that I was in this environment with my best friends, that I can see God's glory in us having expressed that day to those campers and then seeing it lived out in my own life. Those 3 guys making me be the husband I needed to be, sustaining me through that process. Because they were authentic, because they were selfless, because they were humble, and because we shared that experience together. Let's pray and get out of here.